and I'm really pleased to welcome you to the Good Society Public Seminar Series, which has been running for several years now, and we're now getting into the swing of our online format. So I do hope you enjoy the evening and that you'll look out for future ISR events. Professor Jo Crotty, who is the Director of ISR, is also here, and she's going to chair the Q&A session later on. So we'd like you to type any questions and comments into the chat box. So you should be able to see a little chat bubble at the bottom of the screen. So if you click on that, you'll be able to type comments into the chat box as things occur to you during Anthony's talk. And then Jo will collate those questions and pose them to Anthony after he's finished speaking. And we ask that you keep your cameras and your microphones turned off throughout the evening. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Anthony Brown, our speaker for tonight. Anthony is the chair of Preston, Windrush Generation and Descendants UK. And I must tell you that the co-founder of that organisation, Glenda Andrew, is appearing on the BBC's One Show right now as we speak. So you might want to watch her appearance on iPlayer after this. So Anthony is also a member of the Home Office's Windrush Stakeholder Advisory Group and a member of the Windrush National Organisation. Anthony's also the co-founder of Windrush Defenders Legal CIC. This organisation conducts pro bono weekly surgeries to assist victims of the Windrush Scandal to apply for documentation to confirm their legal status and then to apply for compensation. Windrush Defenders Legal is campaigning for law reform to protect future generations with legislation in a Winrush Act. And the Act would also establish a Commonwealth Community Cohesion Fund. You're going to hear more about this important work that Anthony's involved in this evening, so I shall hand over to him now. Thank you, Anthony.
Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to try and get my screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Not yet.
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Can you see my? Can you see?
Yeah, we can see it now.
Excellent. So yeah, so I'm Anthony Brown, and I'm the chairman of Preston Winrush. But we also co-founded Winrush Defenders Legal. I was born in Jamaica in 1960. That's me, the boss in the middle, with my two brothers, Paul and Steve, and my two sisters, Angela and Valerie, and that's my mum, Veronica, at the back. So, like many thousands of people from the Caribbean, my dad had received a call to come to the UK and to help rebuild the country after the war. So he came over in the 50s, came back to Jamaica, and then came back again in 1960. And then I was born in 1960. And we came to join my dad, who was a civil engineer. So he was literally rebuilding the country. We were all able to come to the UK, or my dad was able to come to the UK because in 1948, Parliament passed an act that said we were all citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies. So my dad had free movement. He could come to Britain because this was his country, as well as the island of Jamaica was a colony of this country. So he was as much a citizen as anybody born here. And Jamaica had been a colony of Britain since 1655. So if we go right back, the English Civil War ended in 1648, and Oliver Cromwell in 1655 built up the English Navy, and he sent them off to the Caribbean to capture some of the islands that Spain had taken. The Spanish were the power in the Caribbean at the time because they had started the age of discovery, and Britain wanted a piece of that. So Oliver Cromwell sent the ships. They were supposed to capture Hispaniola. That mission didn't work out. They were repelled, and the ships went on to what was at the time a backwater of the Spanish Empire, and the British, the English landed, and the Spanish at that time decided to flee, but they had slaves on the island, and they armed those slaves and said that, you know, they should fight the British while they escaped. But the slaves had other ideas. They took to the hills and got their own freedom because they had the guns to defend themselves, and they became the Maroons, and they lived in the mountains and had, you know, fights with the British on and off. But in 1739, Britain signed a peace treaty with them, so they became an autonomous part of Jamaica. Roll on, after a number of years of rebellion, we had the emancipation from slavery in 1833, came into effect 1834. So the slaves were set free, and the slave masters got an enormous compensation. They got, I think it was the equivalent of about £20 billion today to share out amongst them. And that has taken quite a long time to pay off. And we can see a letter I put in the chat that it was only paid off in 2015. So in effect, you had the people who had been enslaved, their descendants were actually, through their taxes, paying for the debt that had been used to pay off the people who had enslaved their ancestors. And that irony comes into sharp focus later on when we get to the Windrush compensation. So the 1948 British Nationality Act made us all citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies. The call came that another country needed help, so people got on the Empire Windrush. So the Empire Windrush was actually sent to Jamaica to pick up some of the servicemen who had fought in the war and had gone back to Jamaica on leave, but they were needed to come back because the manpower was still needed. And some entrepreneurial captain on the Winrush decided that, well, he had room for more and sold cheap tickets. And that started the wave of people from the Caribbean. The government realized that there was a pool of labor there. So one Enoch Powell was sent to the Caribbean to run campaigns to encourage people to come to the UK to help rebuild the country. And they took out advertising, they had meetings around the country, and people responded to the call and came to Britain to help rebuild. So the Empire Windrush landed on 22nd of June 1948 at Tilbury Docks as what we mark as the first major wave of people from the Caribbean. I mean, black people had been living in Britain for hundreds of years, as you know, we've shown with the colonies. People did come here and go back, so there was people going backwards and forwards for hundreds of years. But even before that, in Roman times, there's evidence that there were black people in Britain. So there's always been a history of black people in Britain. You know, Empire Windrush is there as a marker for a large migration from the Caribbean, but it's by no means the first time people from the Caribbean were living in Britain and coming to Britain. People took many jobs. This is Uton Christian. I knew Uton. He was someone who had come over on the Windrush, and I met him in 1998 when we did the 50th anniversary here in Manchester, and he was someone who was a pillar of the community. He was also Justice of the Peace, and he did lots of community work. But for his pains in what he did, he and my dad, when Jamaica was given independence in 1962, the Jamaica Independence Act, which was passed by Parliament, Section 2.2, revoked his citizenship. So here you had all these people coming to help another country, living here as equal citizens, and Jamaica was told it was going to get independence, fine, for all the people living in Jamaica, but the people who were living here, they had their citizenship revoked, and nobody bothered to, you know, make it clear to them what the situation was and what they needed to do. It was just said that, you know, you can live here, but you're not a citizen, because if your father and your father's father, as it says in the act there, is born in Jamaica, then you're Jamaican. And that is the start of the difficulties, as you can see, for what later happened in 2014. Now, when you are not a citizen of the country, it means that you are an immigrant. So overnight, my dad, Mr. Christian, and all those people who had fought for the country, who had been enslaved by the country, by their ancestors, and the ones that were living here, you know, in 1948, they were told they were citizen, and then in 1971, they were made immigrants by the Immigration Act, because the 1962 Act took away their citizenship, and the Act in 1971 made them immigrants in their own country. And then Section 3.8, which is another key point, says that if any question should arise as to whether or not a person is patrial, meaning do they have a right of abode to live here, then it's up to the person to prove it. That's what the law says. You know, you can live here, but if there's a question as to whether or not you're a patrial, you have to prove it. And the government didn't give anybody any documents to show that they had, you know, a right to be here. They'd been given indefinite leave in law, but no documents. Now, we were completely unaware of all of this, my family. My dad, in 1973, he went back to Jamaica and took myself with him. That's me on the right. And I met my best friend at school. He was Chinese. We went to school, Jamaica College, And it was a time where there was mixed issues, because it took me a while to settle again, because you come here when I was very young, you build up attachments, and then you take them back. And I was a little bit at sea for a while, and eventually I persuaded my mum that she should allow me to come back to the UK, because I was just missing all my friends. My brother was still here, my two sisters were still here. It just felt that I had to come back. But in 1983, I don't know why I'd ever want to deport such a lad, but in 1983, because I'd been out of the country for more than 2 years, I wanted to go to university, and they said, you know, we're treating you as an overseas student now. I said, why? I grew up here. They said, you've got to check with the Home Office. So I wrote to the Home Office, and the Home Office wrote back to say, no, the 1971 Immigration Act said that if you're out of the country for more than 2 years, you lose your right to remain. And then I faced deportation. So after all that history, after all that support for the UK, all that work my dad did, you know, and all the people that was here, they wanted to deport me. And it was shocking, because you felt a complete loss of identity. You felt terrified, because you felt that, you know, you weren't going to see your friends, you weren't going to see your family again. I'd spent all those years wanting to come what I thought was home, come home, and here was home, threatening me with this deportation again. We had an anti-deportation campaign, so my friends, family wrote letters, the community rallied round, and we protested. We got petitions signed, and eventually, you know, it went on national television, and the government, Margaret Thatcher, had come to power, saying that we were being swamped by immigrants. So no longer were we British, you know, somehow or other, we turned into immigrants, and I was facing deportation. So after a while, my friends, people from the community centre, took me to see my MP. He was none other than the grandson of Winston Churchill, the MP for Stretford. He was also Winston Churchill, and we told him my case, that I'd gone to school here, been back to Jamaica, come back here, and now they were trying to deport me. And he wrote on my behalf, and then after a while, the government relented and gave me what they call indefinite leave to remain. But I regard that as second-class citizenship. So we have all these thousands of people who had come to help, and they're all now made second-class citizens or immigrants. And that, for me, is the Windrush Scandal. Now, I'd wanted to do law when I wanted to go to university, but because of what had happened with the deportation, it just turned my life upside down, and I got jobs and did various things in business. But then after a family breakup in 2012, I decided that I wanted to pursue that. It was just something in my gut all the years that you know, I should do it. I used to wake up in the night saying, you know, thinking that I'd graduated and I hadn't, and so I just had to get it out of my system. So I embarked on a law degree through the Open University, which people tell me is one of the hardest ways to do it, but I just felt I had to do it. And so in 2018 I graduated, and coincidentally in 2018 that's when the Windrush scandal broke. because we had the Caribbean heads of government that had come to a conference, the Commonwealth Heads of Government Conference in 2018 was being held in London. And here were all these Caribbean heads of government seeing stories in the media about all these people who had come here, had been living here decades, and many of them had found themselves being deported. They'd found themselves being put in detention, and it was a scandal. And they asked to see Theresa May, and Theresa May at that time promised that they would right the wrongs that was done to the Windrush generation, and they would pay compensation. So I heard this, and I felt, well, there are many people who won't know what to do. So there were various meetings in the community in Manchester, and I went along to one of those meetings, and I decided to share my story. And before I shared it, I asked people, how many people here are affected by the Windrush Scandal, have got situations where they haven't got the documents to show that they have a right to be here, and nobody put their hands up. So I knew then that they were going through much of what I'd gone through, because they were frightened, because over the years I never told anybody that I only had indefinite leave to remain. I kept it quiet. If I got stopped by the police, I was always terrified, because I knew if I was fitted up for anything or I got in any trouble, I could be deported. And that was a risk, that was a fear that was always there. And that grew over time because you got more at stake. When you're a young person, oh, you can go and restart. But then once you get a family, a house, and other things, you don't want to be torn away from your family and sent away. And so there's that threat all the time, and that anxiety in the background. And how do you compensate for 40 years of that kind of living? And this is what I realized these people are facing. So I thought, well, if I tell my story, maybe they'll sort of open up. So I told my story, and then I asked again at the end, and 6 people put their hands up. And I says, well, I know exactly what's happening. What we're going to do is we're going to form a group, because that's what was done for me when I was facing deportation. They formed an anti-deportation committee, and I says, we will work with each other, keep each other informed about what's happening, so that you know, we'll get through this together. So I helped them, because I'd now, you know, developed some skills to complete their application forms for the Winrush scheme. I completed my own, and within 3 weeks I got my citizenship back after 35 years. And those 6 people, we're still waiting on a couple of them after 2 years, because what's happened is that they're no longer seen as people who should have their citizenship restored. They're seen as immigrants who should naturalize. And then when they apply the law for naturalization, it asks, are you of good character? Now, some people make mistakes, they pay for those mistakes, but the Home Office is not subject to the 1974 Rehabilitation of Offenders Act. So people who have committed offences, they can be refused getting their citizenship back. So we've got, you know, a couple of those who had offences committed offences, and they can't get their citizenship back. And I just feel that that is wrong, because, you know, people were equal citizens at the beginning, and if somebody who is a citizen commits an offence, they don't get banned from going abroad or not being able to have their citizenship, but it does for people from the Caribbean. So, you know, in effect, there's a second-class citizenship system operating. So with that, we formed Windrush Defenders Legal. We got people to volunteer. So we've got some law students, the two on the end, Rochelle and Tanika, who I believe are at Edge Hill. One was at Edge Hill, well, both were at Edge Hill. I think Rochelle has graduated with a first in law, so she supports us with the surgeries that we do at the Winrush Centre, and that's Lorna and Leonie, who was also on the OU course with me. We've also gone on to develop a Winrush national organisation. So we network with groups from around the country, and this was a meeting that we had in Manchester. Now, with the immigration laws, what happens is that a border comes down where you had free movement of people. Now, we've just gone through Brexit, and we've seen the tensions that developed for the 3 million EU migrants that were living here. And it was felt that, you know, they didn't want to happen to them what happened to the Winrush generation. And so a treaty had to be signed whereby the European Courts of Justice would have a say in how they were treated after. And I asked the question, well, who says anything about how people from the Winrush generation are treated now? Because, you know, what we had before was a free movement situation, but a barrier had come down and damaged the community cohesion that we had. So you couldn't get that movement between families back and forth. If you went abroad, your family could be torn apart because you could be refused re-entry. If you stayed out of the country for more than 2 years and you were back, you could be deported, like I was and like many people was over the years. So over the years, there has been, through the immigration laws, a lot of damage done to community cohesion in the Caribbean. Sorry, in the Caribbean community. So if you've got a child and the parents get removed, then that child's prospects is enormously diminished. That damages community cohesion. If you have families that are struggling with the trauma of being separated and they, you know, not working to their full capacity, that damages community cohesion because, you know, they're not sort of achieving the same economic standards as everybody else around them. And we find that this damage to community cohesion is not only through the immigration laws, it goes through things like the criminal justice system, where the sentences that are handed down are much longer for Black people. And we had a conference that the young people put together, and they wanted to learn from the older generation as to what were the strategies that they employed to get them through the hostile environment and to maintain community cohesion, and to see whether or not there were new things that they could learn in going forward. And they created a digital forum for this to happen on the 22nd of June. And we had various workshops along the lines of these 5 themes. And some of the things that we looked at within the criminal justice system was that Black Caribbean people are 9.6 times more likely to be stopped and searched as white British people. An incredible figure. And that's from a site called Ethnic Facts. In education, you can see there that with the Chinese students, 25.7% of Chinese students are getting 3 A levels or better. And next you have the Black students, only 5.5% got 3 A grades or better. That's the lowest percentage of all these ethnic groups. How come that we get stopped and searched the most, we're the lowest in terms of educational attainment? School exclusions. We call this the school to prison pipeline. Black Caribbean pupils are twice as likely to be temporarily excluded as white British pupils. 3 times as likely to be permanently excluded. And we know where that leads to. It leads to more arrests and more prison. In health, there are disparities in health, but in mental health, Black people are 3.4 times more likely to be sectioned than white people. That is a Holocaust. So what do we do? So we had the Windrush Scandal, where people were losing their jobs, losing their homes, being denied access to the NHS, being denied entitlement to benefits, having to prove their children was rightfully theirs, unlawfully incarcerated, unlawfully detained and deported, refused re-entry to the UK after going on holidays. People even died. Dexter Brixton died because of the stress and pressure of the ordeal. All of this damages community cohesion. And on top of that, you have all the other race disparities. And so we looked at all that, and we put our conference report together, and we looked at what it was that we thought we could do to protect future generations and to begin to address the damage that had been done to community cohesion. Now, the government said that they would provide a pathway for people to regain their citizenship, and they put in place the Winrush scheme. Now, the government estimated that 50,000 people had been affected by the scandal. You know, we believe it's much more, but only 12,000 people has been granted documents. So 3,613 have been granted what I class as second-class citizenship, and 5,000 odd others have been granted British citizenship. So out of the 50,000 people, I would say only 5,000 have been had their wrongs righted. Now, this report comes from, these figures come from a report by the Home Secretary to the Home Affairs Select Committee on the 28th of April 2020. And it shows that 13,745 people had been refused from when they applied to the scheme, 2,400 from inside the UK and 11,300 from overseas. Now, I suspect those 11,000 will be people like myself who nothing was said about the law and they've been ripped apart from their families. And of the 2,400 inside the UK, I've met many of them. Many of them came before I came to this country. There's one lady who came here in 1961, and I came in 67. But she stayed here for 10 years then because her father was ill, had to go back to Trinidad. Then life took its course and she got married. But then when her husband died a few years ago, obviously you want to come back and be with your family. But she made an application and it's been refused. Said that she doesn't have close ties. So for me, the scandal is still going on. So we wrote to the Home Secretary, and we said that we wanted her to that all people who were either born as British subjects prior to 1948 or as citizens of the United Kingdom post 1948 and had been settled in the UK for more than 5 years by 1st of January 1983 should, for the purposes of the Immigration Act 1971 and the British Nationality Act 1981, be treated as having continued to be citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies throughout this period, so that the impact of any independence legislation wouldn't be taken into consideration. So what it would effectively mean at a stroke, that people who now are being turfed out of their jobs because they haven't got the documents, that wouldn't happen anymore because they'd have a right in law to citizenship, and then it's a matter then of registration, not all this application that takes forever and a day because of the bureaucracy, and at the end of it you're refused. We also proposed that there was an additional payment on top of any compensation for reparations, because we believe that the wrong that was done was revoking these people's citizenship in the first place. And so that alone, if people then applied through the Winrush scheme and were successful, that alone would get the reparations, not having to show that they'd suffered any harm or impact on family life or distress. Because when we look at the history of it, we see that there was a lot of racism involved in making these laws. So we wrote to the Home Secretary, but the response that the Home Secretary gave us was so inadequate, we believed it was unlawful to respond in that way. And so we've initiated judicial review proceedings, and that's going to go to court, where we're going to ask a judge to decide on whether the Home Secretary should have responded in that way, and to ask the judge to make a number of mandatory orders. We know that he probably won't be able to do all of them because he won't have the power. So our strategy then is to ask Parliament to legislate, because unless we deal with the law, then the harms that were suffered, the wrongs that were done will continue, because it was the law in the first place that changed, that caused this chain reaction. It's the law that says that if there's any question being a patrial, then it's up to the person claiming that to prove it. And that's what's happened to the Windrush Generation. The 2014 Immigration Act said that if they went to the doctors, they needed to show that they had a right to live here. So that meant the border had moved to the doctors. No longer did you have to show your passport at the airport and the ports. You now had to show your passport to the doctor. You had to show your passport when you were employed to get your driver's license, to get your bank account. All these things, the government, in trying to create a hostile environment, as if it wasn't hostile enough already, said that people had to produce these documents to show that they had a legal right to be in the country, when, you know, their citizenship had been revoked and they'd never been given any documents over those 50, 60 years to show that they had a legal right to be in the country. And that's the way our government has been acting with its citizens, with its population. So what we're proposing is a Winrush Act, and we're saying that within the Wendy Williams Lessons Learned report, there is a recommendation 21, that calls on the Home Office's look at immigration laws. But we're saying that all the immigration laws that have a discriminatory impact on the Windrush Generation should be amended or repealed. And then we should have, because of all the institutional racism that's been created and the disparities that we talked about earlier, we should have a duty placed on public bodies to tackle these disparities. The Race Equality Act 2010, with the public sector duty, equality duty, if a public body has a new policy or a new strategy, you need to look at how it impacts on race and make sure that, you know, it doesn't discriminate or disadvantage people. But the disparities that are already there, there's no duty on them to tackle it or do anything. And so this is what we're saying is, you know, it needs to happen, because over the years, the Windrush Generation, their rights have been whittled away, and they suffered a hostile environment for decades, and that's why they're bottom in all sorts of areas. And so we need to start to address that with the law, as well as the community then working together to see how they can rebuild and establish community cohesion. And so within the law, we're calling for the establishment of a community cohesion fund, or a Commonwealth Community Cohesion Fund, and that will provide targeted resources to Black organisations, specifically to tackle the race disparities in the criminal justice system, in education, in health, and in work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anthony. It's absolutely fascinating. If people who've been watching want to put their questions in the chat, I can collate them and ask them to Anthony. But while you're doing that, I would like to say that you come across as incredibly composed and holding yourself with a lot of grace, but underneath you must be absolutely seething with anger. Am I right?
Yeah, you are correct. But I have to hold it together, because that's what we British do.
Yes. So I
stiff upper lip.
yeah, seemingly. So I have my first question here, actually, and it's related to what I just said, which was, how do you keep the energy going to keep fighting on this? Where do you get your strength from to keep going?
Spirituality. People from the Caribbean. We have a strong sense of spirituality. We were brought up with faith. We also have spirituality from our ancestors, because to go through the institution of slavery, and I've looked into a lot of the history around slavery, and it's remarkable how people who were naked and in chains then rose up to rebel against their enslavers, and in some cases defeated them in battle. So like in Haiti, with Toussaint Louverture and the Haitian Revolution, he defeated the French. And then Britain, which we don't get taught in school, sent the largest ever armada to leave British shores, some 80,000 men, to go to Haiti and try to take Haiti, because it was one of the richest colonies that the French had. Well, it's the richest colonies that the French had, to take Haiti after the French had been defeated. But Toussaint defeated the British too, and he defeated the Spanish and the Dutch. And so all the world powers at the time, these people who had been naked and in chains, rose up and defeated their oppressors and declared Haiti a republic. So Haiti was the first country to end slavery in 1803. Britain ended it in 1833, the Act coming into effect. But that spirit could be seen in the Maroons, who I said earlier, taken to the hills when the Spanish released them. And it's just working and believing and seeing how, people had worked before. So what I noticed was that after these great rebellions, there was always a law passed. So in 1807, it was the abolition of the Slave Trade Act after the Haitian Revolution. And then there was a great rebellion in Jamaica in 1831, led by Sam Sharp. And that led to the Emancipation Act. And after political strife in Jamaica in the 50s, it led to the Independence Act. So it got to my head that there's something here about law. So I figured, well, instead of, fighting in the streets and having a revolution, why don't I build on what the ancestors have done and study law and then use the law? So this is the idea of the judicial review. It's to say there's a different way now. We're going to use the law now, and we're going to look to how we can build a better future, because I have children in this country now. They're of mixed heritage. The mother's white. I can't be saying to them that, white's bad and black is good. Which side are they going to go on? So we have to look to the future, and I have to set an example and hold it together, and show them a different way of fighting their corner. And I'm saying that the law needs to be there in place so that they can use the law in future to protect them from these hostile environments that some politicians want to create from time to time because they think that they'll get some votes.
We have a couple of other questions now, quite different. So we've got two from Zana Vathi and one from Paul Ward, both academics at Edge Hill. First question is, what impact do you think the Windrush campaign will have on broader immigration issues in the UK? And the second question is about history. And I think we all noticed that you talked a lot about history in the precursor to the, or setting the scene, if you like, to the Windrush Scandal. So why is history so important to you? I think you might have answered a little bit of that in your last question, but I think we'd all be interested to hear your thoughts on both these issues.
Sorry, could you just tell me what the first one was again?
Yeah, sorry. What do you think the impact of the wider Windrush campaign will be on broader immigration issues in the UK?
Right. I think it will change the way people see immigrants. I mean, there's been a lot of that in terms of what's happened with Brexit, and they've had to recognise that you know, immigrants are of value. So we get less of the Dutch option as to who can be meanest to immigrants. Because when I was growing up, you know, the Labour Party would say, oh, well, we're going to do this. And they passed the 71, well, they came up with the 68 Commonwealth Act, which restricted immigrants. And so they've passed legislation. They passed the 2007 UK Borders Agency Act that has draconian effects for people who have committed offences. If you commit an offence that you've got 1 year sentence for, you can be deported. And so every year you hear about this plane load of Jamaicans that are being deported, that then deters people from coming forward for the Winrush scheme. So it's a bit confused, but I think what's happened with the Windrush generation will dampen down that kind of politics, I hope, because people are now using their voice and speaking out and telling their stories and sharing it with the wider public. Me here tonight, people are interested to know, and I think the British public will do exactly what they did in history before. Once they hear these stories, they'll say, oh, well, this we will not put. And that's how they made their contribution to abolishing slavery, because you had various abolitionists that were listening to stories of people like Equiano, who was an enslaved person who wrote, and there was somebody called Thomas Clarkson that read his work and preached at Manchester Cathedral, and got the abolition movement going. And British people at that time said, oh, well, this we will not put. And so I think that the story's going out there, and I can feel it, that people are saying, no, we're not going to have this. And that's the effect I think it will have on immigration. Can you just remind me of the other question?
I can. It was noticeable how much you talked about history in your presentation. So why is history so important to you?
Well, there's an African tradition called Sankofa, and it means looking back and learning from what's happened. So why I like history so much is because you see a lot of the situations today in the past, and you can see some of the strategies that people had in the past. And if you can learn what's happened in the past, and then and try to do things, you know, different in the present, then it all helps. And this is what the young people were doing again at the conference. They were learning from the elders what they had done and hearing their stories, and then thinking, well, how can they learn from that? What can they do different? So that's why history is important. It's to see what happened, what went wrong, how can you learn from that, and how can you do things better?
Well, I think I'm going to speak for everybody when I say that it was absolutely fascinating talk this evening, and thank you very much for also answering the questions. I'm now going to hand back to Victoria, who's going to wrap everything up.
Thank you, Jo, and thank you, Anthony. It was a lovely talk. It just, yeah, as Jo said, your presence is so calming, but then there's this such anger and passion, you know, beneath the surface. It's really, really inspiring to hear. So thank you ever so much for being here.
Thank
and
you.
I just want to remind everybody about Glenda's appearance on the One Show. So do have a look at that. You should be able to access it on iPlayer after this talk. So thank you again, and do come to our other ISR events.
Thank you.